Hello and welcome to the second video on my new independent Manchester United YouTube channel, Positively United. Now, I promised in the channel launch video that I would get round to making a video about why it was right to sack Rúben Amorim, which might seem like a strange thing for a YouTube channel called Positively United to do, but I want to try and explain why I think sacking Rúben Amorim was a positive, because his leadership of the club could not have gone on. And in fact, there's a lot to be said that it should have ended quite a bit sooner. So let's look back, shall we? Amorim was appointed on the 1st of November 2024 and took his position as head coach, our first head coach, 10 days later. He arrived with a huge fanfare, hugely respected up-and-coming manager in Europe, huge expectation, a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of positivity about him becoming our head coach. And I think most people looking at that appointment by Ineos would have seen it as a really positive, progressive, forward-thinking appointment. We thought we were getting one of the best young managers, one of the best young coaches in European football. So how did it work out for him in that period from the 11th of November until the end of the season? Well, let's have a look at the stats, shall we? And stats don't tell you everything, but, you know, football is about winning football matches. It's about accumulating points. It's about scoring more goals than the opposition. So, in Amorim's first season, 24-25, he coached the club to 27 games. Won 7, drew 6, lost 14, for a win percentage of just a shade under 26%. Let that sink in for a second. A win percentage of 26%. Now, there were all sorts of excuses made. One of the excuses was that the squad was getting used to a new formation, a 3-4-3 formation, that most of the players were unused to playing. So let's just accept that that's the case. Let's just accept that there would have been a bedding-in period where the players got used to playing in this new 3-4-3 formation. The other excuse that was used for the dismal record in the Premier League was that Manchester United eventually turned their attention to making sure that they qualified for Europe next season by concentrating all of their firepower on winning the Europa League. And that effort, team selection, resting players, rotation was all geared up to making sure that we won our Europa League matches. And, well, it did, didn't it? What great nights we had at Old Trafford last season, seeing United make incredible turns around in games to get us through to the final. And then what happened in the final? One of the most turgid, dislocated, disappointing performances that I've ever seen Manchester United put in a final. We lost against a bog-ordinary Tottenham team. Do you remember the phrase, "It's only Tottenham, lads"? Yeah, we lost to Tottenham. A really ordinary Tottenham team in a lifeless, lackluster, directionless performance in the final. You know, at the end of last season, with a win percentage of 26% and a dismal, dismal performance in the Europa League final, I think there was a real call at that time to be made. Have we made the wrong choice? Is this going well? Even allowing for the fact that he'd introduced a new formation, even allowing for the fact that he'd only been in there since 11 months, since November, to me, the writing was on the wall right at the end of last season. All the warning signs were there. A dull, lackluster style of play. So unlike Manchester United, it seemed sometimes like I was watching another team play. A manager who seemed incapable of adjusting tactics during a game. The almost obsessive fixation on the formation above all else. I couldn't help but think last season about the story that went around that when Jurgen Klopp announced that he was leaving Liverpool, Liverpool took a good, long, hard look at Rúben Amorim and decided that he wasn't for the Premier League. Did they know something that we didn't? Did they spot something that we didn't? I have to say, I was really uncomfortable at the end of last season with Amorim. But it would have been pretty hard to sack him at the end of last season, perhaps. He had only come in for part of the season. You could argue he didn't have the players that he wanted. So let's take him through to the next season. The summer, well, we're told that the summer was really enthusiastic and the summer tour gave us a lot of good hope. Really? I remember one good game in the summer tour, maybe two, but I also spotted two pretty ordinary and dull performances as well. So anyway, the season starts and we've bought really good players. Cunha's an excellent purchase and Buemo's an excellent purchase. There are question marks about Chesko because we all have to admit he didn't appear to be our first choice. But he's still a forward who, if you were following him in German football, he appeared to look really good. And then the season starts. And because we'd done so badly in the previous season, we entered the League Cup in the second round and went to play at Grimsby. This was the moment I knew that Rúben Amorim wasn't the man for Manchester United. And that's not being wise after the event. I wish I'd been making these YouTube videos at that time because I would have said so at that time. Anybody who knows me will know that I bored the ears off them for days after that game, telling them that I thought Rúben Amorim wasn't the man for Manchester United. Why? Well, not just because of the result. Look, in cup competition, you lose against teams from lower divisions. That's the whole point of cup competition. It's the magic of any cup. So you sometimes have to accept you get a beating. And it's happened to Manchester United in the past. We've lost against lower league teams. It wasn't so much for defeat, although the defeat was incredibly disappointing. It was Rúben Amorim's overall performance that night. Do you remember it? Do you remember him stood, or should I say squatting at the touchline? Often it seemed barely unable to look at the game that was being played on the pitch. Remember that scene when substitutions were being planned? And there was that truly bizarre scene with him staring at that tactics board, fiddling around with counters. And he didn't actually seem to be talking to anybody or showing the board to anybody. He seemed to be in a world of his own, fiddling with counters. And then there was the penalties. And that's when I had it with Amorim. It's totally unacceptable for a manager of a football team, any football team, but it was especially painful to see the manager of Manchester United unable to look at his own players whilst they were taking penalties. His own players? Not able to look at them? You know, I can understand if a fellow player can't look at the penalties. You often see that when the players are lined up on the halfway line, some of the players are looking in the opposite direction because they just can't look. I can understand fans not being able to look. But the manager, head coach, not being able to look at his own players whilst they're taking penalties, doesn't he at least need to be looking at them to look at their technique? To see which ones look comfortable, which ones look nervous? Because there's going to be another time when your team is going to be in that situation. Don't you need to know which of your players can be relied upon to take a penalty? I thought it was a truly shameful performance by Rúben Amorim that night that actually brought the club into disrepute. I said to a friend of mine at the time, I said, you know, if this man's going to be a success at United, one of the things they're going to have to do is send him for some sort of counselling. If he is unable to watch the game, and it wasn't just the penalties he was unable to watch. Remember, I said earlier on, there were times when he was squatting at the side of a pitch, looking down at the pitch, seemingly not watching the game. This looked like a man totally overwhelmed by what he was being asked to do. Manage the biggest football team in the world. And that's when I lost it with Amorim. I know I was very early in that regard. I don't think many people probably said that they would have liked to have seen Amorim got rid of at that time. But I certainly reached that conclusion because it was based on what I already felt about him at the end of the previous season. Then all the conversation started about the format, the formation of the team, the rigid adherence to 3-4-3. Now, I completely understand that team formation is not everything. It isn't. There are very successful teams that play 3-4-3. But what I've never encountered in my time watching Manchester United, or I find it hard to think of it in any other context either, is a manager who is so obsessed and wedded to a formation that he won't even change it in a game when circumstances are screaming out for the formation to be changed. And I think there were many examples this season when Amorim should have changed the formation during a game and didn't. It seemed like rigidity for rigidity's sake. Actually, what it seemed like was a man who was lacking in confidence and who replaced confidence with a rigid adherence to a process, come what may. Now, I know we keep harking back in this club to Alex Ferguson. And perhaps that does actually need to change, but let's just do it for now because everyone else does. Ferguson changed formations during games. Ferguson would swap wingers around. He'd send Eric Cantona over to the left. All the players decided to do it for themselves because they were given the freedom and latitude to do so. I didn't really see that much freedom and latitude in any of Amorim's teams. Everybody seemed to be playing to a rigid template that they had to adhere to, which removed their individuality and flair and freedom. Another problem, I feel, with Amorim's approach. But I think what the formation conversation was a cipher for was it was an easy way to say something else. It was an easy way for us to all who spotted it to discuss the issue of Rúben Amorim's seeming total inflexibility or ability to adapt to changing circumstances within a game. Don't you think that's partly why United under Amorim found it so difficult to hold on to leads and why leads were often overturned by the opposition in matches? Because Amorim didn't seem to be able to ever shut up shop, adapt, change, bring on when we were behind, bring on substitutes that could change the game. So up until the time he was sacked, his win percentage had gone up from 26% last season to 40% this season. But as I'll show you in a bit, yeah, that's an improvement, but it still isn't very good. His overall win percentage, by the way, over both seasons was just under 32%. But let's have a look where Amorim compared to all the post-Ferguson managers. His win percentage of, as I said, just under 32% is rock bottom. So on the table there, you can see Amorim managers for 42 Premier League, 47 games, sorry. And so what I've done is I've drawn up this table, which includes, for when it's possible, the first 47 games for each manager. And in the case of Moyes and Ranić, a smaller number because they never got to 47 games. So if we look at the first 47 games or under for all of our managers, Ten Hag has a win percentage of just under 60%. Remember when we used to think that Ten Hag was a terrible manager? What we would do for a win percentage of 60% today. Van Gaal, 55%. Mourinho, 51%. Moyes. Many people accuse Moyes of being the worst of the post-Ferguson managers. He had a win percentage of 50%. Solskjaer, 46.8%, nearly 47%. Ranić had 41, very nearly 42. Amorim, just under 32. You know, if you strip out all the emotion, if you strip out all the nonsense about Amorim was sacked because he had a one row with Jason Wilcox, because he wasn't backed by the club, that Gary Neville had a quiet word in Sir Jim Ratcliffe's ear. If you put all that nonsense to one side, what got Amorim sacked was sheer incompetence. He wasn't a very good manager. In fact, he was a very poor manager. The absolute worst of the post-Ferguson era. And in fact, if I think about my own lifetime, I can probably only think of Franco Farrell, nickname Franco Failure, as perhaps being a worst Manchester United manager. That's quite some record. Amorim was sacked last week, and some people are claiming they were surprised by that sacking. If you were surprised by that sacking, I don't know whose football matches you've been watching over the last season and a bit. Because the sacking was on its way. It had been coming for a long time. It could have been administered after the debacle of the Europa final last season, that appalling performance against Tottenham, and the terrible record of Amorim last season. It could have occurred, as I said, after the Grimsby game, when I think he showed without any doubt at all he wasn't up to the stress and magnitude of managing this club. It could have happened in any of the recent performances where we have drawn at home or lost at home. That game against Everton where we lost 1-0 against a team with 10 men. Wasn't that a warning sign? Wouldn't any club have been reasonable in sacking him at that very moment? No. I think instead of constantly bashing Ineos and having a go at Jason Wilcox, I actually think probably what we should do is say, you gave him enough of a chance, enough rope. Now, the exact circumstances that led up to Amorim's sacking does appear to be a breakdown in relationship between Wilcox and Amorim. But the warning signs had been there for a very long time. the game against Crystal Palace, when Sir Jim turned round to Barada and Wilcox and clearly was expressing his fury at the way that United were playing in that game in the first half. He had every right to. If Amorim hadn't been sacked, I genuinely think, by the way, in a contrived manner, I think everyone in the end was quite happy to part company. If Amorim hadn't been sacked because he had a row with Jason Wilcox, it would have happened a week after or the week after that. It would have happened at some time at the beginning of this year because it was going to happen. Amorim just wasn't good enough for Manchester United. Now, I think it's been a strange video, as I said, for a YouTube channel that prides itself in positivity. But succeeding in any business, and football is a business, part of success is admitting failure and not holding on to failure, but dealing with it. And I think that Manchester United made a mistake appointing Rúben Amorim. I think they made a mistake holding on to him for so long, and it would have been completely nonsensical to keep that mistake going. Being a success means recognizing failure and then tackling it when you see it. Rúben Amorim was a failure, and it was right that he was sacked. Let's not rewrite history. Let's not pretend that it was a surprise. It was inevitable, and it was the right thing to do. So let's now move on. As always, if you like what I've said, or even intrigued or perplexed or angry about what I've said, like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you have friends who you think would welcome looking at this kind of content, let them know about the channel too. If you like what I do and you want to in some way support it, I've set up a coffee channel, the link to which will be in the description. And until then, think positively about United and see you next time.